Tyrannosaurus rex. The name alone sends shivers down the spine. It translates to tyrant lizard king, and for good reason. This dinosaur was the apex predator of its time. Towering up to 20 feet tall and stretching over 40 feet long, it weighed as much as an elephant and had jaws powerful enough to crush bones with a single bite. With banana-sized teeth and a skull built like a tank, T-Rex was one of the most formidable land predators in Earth's history. And yet, in the midst of all that strength, power, and fearsome design, two tiny, almost 2 to 3 feet long arms, shorter than a human child's. Two stubby little limbs hanging from a monstrous frame. Why would nature design such a terrifying creature with arms that seem too small to do anything at all? This is the central mystery that has fascinated paleontologists, scientists, and dinosaur enthusiasts for decades. Over the next few minutes, we'll dig deep into that mystery. We'll look at the fossils, the bones, the science. We'll explore the many theories that attempt to explain those tiny arms, from evolutionary adaptation to combat use to mating behavior and beyond. We'll also uncover what modern technology has revealed that the old science never could. This isn't just about the arms of a dinosaur. It's about how nature evolves, adapts, and surprises us. It's a journey through deep time, millions of years in the making. So before we dive into these theories in depth, let's look at the anatomy of the arms themselves. T-Rex arms were short, yes, but extremely robust. Each arm had 2 claws, and those claws were sharp and curved, ideal for slashing. The bones of the upper arm, the humerus, were thick and strong, capable of withstanding significant stress. Studies of muscle attachment sites on fossil bones suggest that the arms were capable of lifting hundreds of pounds. That's no joke. That's strength far beyond a human arm. So clearly these arms weren't flimsy, they were short but built like power tools. So why would an animal with such powerful jaws even need arms at all? After all, T-Rex was a headhunter, it killed with its mouth. Maybe it didn't need them much, but if that's the case, why didn't evolution shrink them even more, or remove them entirely? T-Rex lived during the late Cretaceous period, around 66 to 68 million years ago, in what is now North America. Its fossils have been found in places like Montana, South Dakota, and Wyoming. During its time, the landscape was lush, filled with rivers, forests, and other dinosaurs, both herbivores and predators. T-Rex wasn't just big. It was smart. It had one of the largest brains for a dinosaur of its size, and its senses were razor sharp. Scientists believe T-Rex had extraordinary eyesight, capable of tracking movement with precision. Its hearing was acute, allowing it to detect the low rumbles of prey or rivals from miles away, and its sense of smell was exceptional, possibly the best of any terrestrial animal living or extinct. All these traits made it an elite hunter, but for all its predatory features, those arms stood out. They didn't match the rest of the design. They looked like leftovers from another animal entirely. For decades, people assumed they were useless, a strange evolutionary mistake. But science, as we'll see, has begun to challenge that assumption. The first T-Rex fossil was discovered in 1902 by fossil hunter Barnum Brown. It was partial, but it was enough to suggest something massive and terrifying. Later finds would complete the picture, revealing a creature with huge legs, a massive tail, a giant head filled with teeth, and 2 tiny forelimbs. As more and more fossils were discovered throughout the 20th century, the same pattern kept emerging. No matter how large the T-Rex specimen, the arms stayed small, consistently around 2 to 3 feet long. They had only 2 fingers, unlike the 3-fingered arms seen in other theropods like Allosaurus. This consistency suggested something important. The arms weren't a mistake. They were part of the design. Nature had kept them for a reason. But what could that reason be? To understand that, we need to understand evolution itself. Evolution is not about perfection. It's about survival. Traits that help an animal survive and reproduce are more likely to be passed on. Traits that don't help, or worse, that become harmful, tend to disappear over time. So if the arms of T-Rex were truly useless, we'd expect them to shrink further, or disappear entirely, but they didn't. They stayed small, yes, but they stayed strong. Thick bones, large muscle attachment points. This wasn't a pair of vestigial twigs, this was a set of compact, powerful limbs with a purpose. So let's talk about the possible theories. Over the years, scientists have proposed there's the comparative approach. Scientists have looked at other dinosaurs, both ancestors and relatives of T-Rex, to understand how arm size evolved over time. Earlier tyrannosaurs like Dilong and Guanlong had longer arms, Over millions of years, those arms gradually shrank as the skull and bite force became more dominant. In fact, some researchers believe that the shrinking arms were part of an evolutionary trade-off. As the head grew larger and more powerful, the arms became less necessary for hunting and killing, so they shrank. But they didn't vanish. Perhaps because they still served a secondary function. T-Rex's arms were small, yes, but they were also strong, capable, and consistent across individuals. They weren't random. They were evolved. They weren't designed to lift, throw, or reach. They were built for compact, forceful action. In the next chapter, we'll explore other theories in depth, starting with the idea that T-Rex may have used its arms as weapons in battle. So far, we've explored how the T-Rex's arms were small, yes, but powerfully built, consistent in fossil evidence and evolutionarily retained. But now we must ask, were these short, strong arms actually weapons? This brings us to one of the most controversial and fascinating ideas, the combat theory. Some paleontologists have suggested that T-Rex may have used its arms as close-range tools of war. Imagine two adult T-Rexes engaged in a brutal fight. Their jaws snap, their tails swing, but at some point they're nearly face-to-face, grappling like wrestlers. In that chaotic, violent moment, the short arms could be used to slash and tear at soft tissue, the neck, the belly, or even the face of the opponent. Why would that make sense? Well, let's consider the evidence. The arms had sharp, curved claws that could inflict deep wounds. Studies suggest those claws were up to 10 centimeters long and nearly 4 inches, and could puncture and rip flesh. In addition, the arms were strong enough to exert hundreds of pounds of force. Paleontologist Stephen Stanley, in 2017, proposed that T-Rex's arms were vicious, slashing weapons. He argued that their shortness was actually an advantage in close combat, making them less vulnerable to being bitten or torn off. While not all scientists agree with Stanley, the idea does raise eyebrows and questions. If T-Rex used its arms in combat, then perhaps they were more than just leftover limbs from its ancestors. Perhaps they evolved to serve a unique, brutal function. Another theory takes us out of the battlefield and into a more intimate setting. Some scientists believe T-Rex's arms may have played a role in mating. Imagine two massive animals trying to align their enormous bodies to reproduce. It would require balance, control, and perhaps a little assistance. Could the arms have helped males grip onto the backs or sides of females during mating? We see similar behavior in many modern animals. For example, birds, descendants of theropod dinosaurs, often use claws or limbs to stabilize themselves during copulation. Crocodilians, distant relatives of dinosaurs, use their limbs to push or guide one another. In that context, it's possible that T-Rex arms served as tools for balance and contact. The argument for this theory is subtle but interesting. The arms weren't long enough to be primary tools, but they might have been secondary stabilizers, perhaps not vital but still useful in a brief but critical biological process. Supporting this theory are some fossilized remains that show relatively little wear on the claws, suggesting that if the arms were used, they were not exposed to frequent violent use. Mating, which occurs less frequently than hunting or combat, could fit that pattern. But again, the truth is unclear. No fossilized evidence can directly show T-Rex in the act of mating. Now let's step back from individual theories and look at a broader evolutionary pattern. The idea that a T-Rex's head got bigger, its arms got smaller. This theory focuses on the concept of functional trade-offs in evolution. The T-Rex skull was absolutely massive, more than 5 feet long in some individuals. It wasn't just big, it was robust, heavily muscled, and reinforced to deliver bone-crushing bites. The head became the main weapon, the main hunting tool, and perhaps even a major tool for social signaling. Maintaining such a powerful skull takes resources, both in growth and in usage. Muscles, nerves, bones, and balance all need to adapt. Some paleontologists believe that as T-Rex evolved to favor the skull as its primary offensive tool, the arms became less necessary and evolution responded by shrinking them. Not eliminating them, but minimizing them. You can see a similar pattern in other creatures. For example, in some modern birds, wings have evolved into specialized tools for flight while legs are reduced. In others, like kiwis, wings are reduced to nubs while the legs take on full responsibility for movement. Nature shifts form according to need. T-Rex may have been no different. With a weaponized head and towering legs, the arms just weren't needed for hunting, and so they reduced in size. One practical theory proposes that T-Rex arms may have helped it stand back up after lying down. Let's imagine the mechanics. A massive animal lies on its side, perhaps to rest, nest, or feed from the ground. When it wants to get back up, it must lift its torso, realign its legs, and stabilize its center of gravity. Could those small arms have helped push the body upward? Some scientists believe so. The shoulder placement and joint strength suggest the arms could extend a bit forward and down. While not long enough to reach far, they may have provided just enough push or stabilization to help the dinosaur rock back onto its feet. So, for a 9-ton predator like T-Rex, even a small boost could have made a big difference. Standing up wasn't just about movement, it was survival. If a predator stayed down too long, it was vulnerable to injury, attack, or even starvation. Let's return to the idea that the arms were used during predation, not for attack, but for grappling. Here's the scenario. T-Rex bites into its prey, perhaps a hadrosaur or a juvenile ceratopsian. The jaws lock down, teeth dig into flesh, and the animal begins to thrash in panic. In that violent moment, two small but strong arms swing forward and help stabilize the victim, holding it in place, pulling it closer, maybe pinning it to the ground. Some modern predators use similar strategies. Big cats like lions and tigers use their forelimbs to hold prey down while biting the neck. T-Rex may have done something similar, using those arms to assist the head, rather than act independently. They were strong, mobile, and limited arcs, and well-suited to pulling inward. The claws could have helped grip flesh, feathers, or scales. This wouldn't make them the main tool of the kill, but a supporting instrument in the process. Even a small amount of control can make a huge difference in a life-or-death struggle. One lesser-known theory focuses not on violence or mating, but identity. What if the arms had a role in social behavior? This idea suggests that the arms could have been used for display, to signal age, status, or health to other T-Rex individuals. Some species of animals have small, seemingly useless features that serve a visual or ritual function. Think of peacock feathers, deer antlers, or the throat sacs of some frogs. They're used in rituals, but not fights or hunting. Could T-Rex arms have served a similar function? Maybe. There is some evidence of sexual dimorphism in T-Rex specimens, differences between male and female skeletons. It's possible the arms had slightly different features in different sexes or changed as the animal aged. However, since soft tissue rarely fossilizes, this remains a speculative idea. Some researchers have even wondered whether T-Rex arms had colorful skin or unique movements used in low-visibility social behavior. Perhaps subtle waving, posing, or posturing. It may sound odd, but again, nature evolves function where it's needed, even if it's not obvious to us. Some other theropods, especially abelisaurids like Carnotaurus, had even smaller arms. Carnotaurus, whose name means meat-eating bull, had arms so small they were nearly invisible. No claws, no mobility, just tiny bone nubs. And yet, it was still an apex predator. This tells us that in some evolutionary branches, arms shrank to extremes, and the animals still thrived. On the flip side, other tyrannosaurids that lived before T-Rex had longer arms, including Gorgosaurus and Albertosaurus. This gives us an evolutionary timeline. Over millions of years as these creatures got larger and their heads became more dominant, their arms steadily reduced in size. So T-Rex isn't a freak accident. It's part of a clear trend. As size, bite force, and hunting strategy evolved, the arms adapted, and in this case, shrank, while still keeping strength, structure, and possibly function. No theory gives us the full answer, but each one gives us a piece of the puzzle. As we continue our journey to understand the tiny arms of the T-Rex, we now enter a more precise, measurable realm, biomechanics. This field of science helps us understand how living organisms move, function, and exert force. When applied to extinct creatures, biomechanics uses fossil measurements, computer simulations, and physics models to estimate how a dinosaur would have used its body. The T-Rex, with its huge legs, massive jaws, and yes, tiny arms, presents a biomechanical paradox. How could such small limbs have any function in such a gigantic creature? Researchers have tried to answer that question by reconstructing the movement and range of motion of the T-Rex arms. Using 3D scans of fossils, muscle reconstructions, and comparative anatomy from modern reptiles and birds, scientists have developed simulations of how far the arms could move, how much weight they could pull, and how quickly they could react. Interestingly, while the arms were short, they were not weak. Studies estimate that each arm could lift over 200 kilograms, roughly 400 pounds, under certain conditions. The shoulder joint allowed for a limited but strong range of motion. So, while the arms were not suited for reaching or grabbing at a distance, they were well adapted for pulling inward. That pulling motion, clutching something close to the chest, could support earlier theories, like holding prey, mating, or assisting with getting up from a resting position. In essence, biomechanics doesn't solve the mystery, but it rules out the idea that the arms were useless. To better understand how the T-Rex might have used its arms, we can turn to its closest living relatives, birds. Yes, birds are modern dinosaurs. Specifically, they descended from small theropods like velociraptor. By studying bird anatomy, behavior, and development, scientists can make inferences about how extinct dinosaurs might have functioned. But birds have wings, not arms. So, how do they help? The answer lies in evolutionary clues. Some birds, especially flightless ones like ostriches and emus, retain strong forelimbs. Ostriches use their wings for balance, mating displays, and even defense. Cassowaries have dagger-like claws on their wings, which they use to slash at predators. These examples tell us that reduced limbs are not always vestigial. Sometimes they evolve to perform niche functions. And in early bird species like Archaeopteryx, which had both wings and claws, we see a transitional form. Part flight, part grasping tool. This type of evolutionary bridge helps support the idea that T-Rex's arms may have retained secondary functions, even as their primary use declined. In other words, just because the arms look small to us doesn't mean nature found them useless. Sometimes fossils tell us more than just the size and shape of bones. They can show injuries, wear patterns, and signs of how the dinosaur lived. Some T-Rex fossils have shown healed fractures in the ribs, jaws, and even arms. These signs of past trauma suggest that the T-Rex lived a rough and violent life, fighting rivals, hunting large prey, or falling during high-speed chases. Interestingly, while arm bones rarely show such fractures, their general condition suggests they were used, not just carried around. The ends of the humerus, the upper arm bone, show muscle attachment scars, clear evidence of strong, frequently used muscles. These scars would be less pronounced if the arms were totally non-functional. Though no fossil has been found with direct evidence of what the arms were doing, this indirect evidence paints a picture of activity. Now let's consider a different angle. What about young T-Rex individuals? Juvenile specimens showed that the arm proportions were different at earlier stages of life. While the arms were still relatively short, they were longer in proportion to the body compared to adults. That suggests one of two possibilities. Either the arms shrank in proportion as the dinosaur grew, or the rest of the body, especially the head and legs, grew faster than the arms. This is called allometric growth, when different parts of the body grow at different rates. It's common in nature. Think about how a puppy's ears or paws might seem huge, or how baby birds have short wings until they grow into them. For T-Rex, this allometric growth indicates that arm function may have changed over time. As juveniles, the arms could have played a bigger role, maybe in hunting smaller prey, climbing, or self-righting. But as the T-Rex matured and its bite became the main weapon, the arms simply didn't keep up. Evolution favored the jaw, and the arms stayed small. This also suggests a dynamic use case. The arms may have been more important at one stage of life, a functional tool for young predators, and then reduced in importance as the adult form took over. Let's begin this final few minutes by widening our perspective. The T-Rex wasn't the only dinosaur with small arms. In fact, many theropod dinosaurs, the group that includes T-Rex, showed trends of forelimb reduction. Take Carnotaurus, for example. This South American predator had arms that were even smaller than those of T-Rex, almost comically short, with virtually no range of motion. They were stubby, immobile, and seemingly useless, and yet Carnotaurus thrived. Then there's Gorgosaurus, a relative of T-Rex, which also displayed tiny arms, and even the mighty Tarbosaurus, often called the Asian T-Rex, had reduced forelimbs. Why did this pattern emerge? It appears that in some lineages of large theropods, as the head grew larger and the bite more powerful, the arms were no longer needed as primary hunting tools. evolution shifted the role of the predator's anatomy, focusing all offensive ability into the skull. It's almost like nature said, why use arms when you have jaws that can crush bone? This trend, repeated across different species, tells us that the reduction of arms wasn't random. It was adaptive. It worked. It helped these dinosaurs survive and dominate their ecosystems. And it tells us that the tiny arms of T-Rex weren't a mistake. They were a solution. And so, after unraveling layers of mystery, anatomy, and evolution, we come to one simple truth. The tiny arms of T-Rex were never a flaw, they were an adaptation. From the jaws that replaced their function to the strength they quietly held, those small limbs tell a story of survival, specialization, and evolutionary success. T-Rex ruled not in spite of its arms, but with them, as part of a design shaped by millions of years. What once seemed laughable now feels awe-inspiring, because in nature, even the smallest features have a purpose. And in the case of the T-Rex, every inch, no matter how tiny, helped build a legend.